Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio version of the weekly Shema Yisrael newsletter titled The Importance of Remembering by Building Altars. Well, this was originally published on day 16 of month 3 on the Creator's calendar, also known as May 25th, 2024, on the Roman calendar. Well, this was Memorial Day weekend in the United States of America, and it's a national holiday when people are encouraged to remember those who died in military service. Most people go on vacation and they party, and camping, boating, barbecue, and drinking are on the agenda for most. Very few actually remember anything except for the fact that they get an extra day off of work on Monday. Those who do observe Memorial Day may attend parades, place flags at grave sites, and hold ceremonies. Their actions are a form of remembrance that memorializes the day, and it can be a very solemn event. Remembering is essential for people and societies, and it's the glue that holds them together. Despite all their differences, it's supposed to be something that they have in common, a shared memory that is important to them all. While the degree of collective societal observance can be a gauge of the strength of a particular society, for instance, if you have a family who died in a past war and you go to their gravesite to remember their sacrifice, that means you have skin in the game, so to speak. You have a connection with the society and with others that have a similar type of experience. And this stands in stark contrast to somebody who recently snuck across the border to get a bunch of free stuff and can't even speak the language. So you can see how if that continues and that can lead to a society that just doesn't have much in common and therefore not much glue to hold it together. And you can see a society begin to unravel. As a result, if you have a society filled with people who have nothing in common, with no shared memories, that society's destined to fail. And that's what we're seeing in America. It used to be called a melting pot because people would blend their differences and join together as Americans. Now there's not much melting going on. America is not very united these days. Well, interestingly, Yahuwah sets forth the proper way to incorporate the foreigner and the stranger into his kingdom, into Israel. And remember how Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal and wrote the commandments on stones from the Jordan? We'll read about that here. It says, Now Moshe, with the elders of Israel, commanded the people, saying, Keep all the commandments which I commanded you today, and it shall be on the day when you cross over the Jordan to the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and whitewash them with lime. You shall write on them all the words of this Torah when you've crossed over, that you may enter the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as Yahweh your Elohim, the Elohim of your fathers, promised you. Therefore it shall be, when you've crossed over the Jordan, that on Mount Ebal you shall set up these stones, which I command you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime. And there you shall build an altar to Yahweh your Elohim, an altar of stones. You shall not use an iron tool on them. You shall build with whole stones the altar of Yahweh your Elohim, and offer burnt offerings on it to Yahweh your Elohim. You shall offer peace offerings, and shall eat there, and rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim. And you shall write very plainly on the stones all the words of this Torah. Well, first and foremost, all the people were supposed to keep all the commandments. That ensures that everyone is living in unity. And that essentially was what the Constitution was in the United States of America and when it was important. And, people would know the Constitution, they would read it, they would memorize it, and they would live according to it. So that's a similar type of scenario. In the kingdom of Elohim, we have the Torah. Well, there was a specific purpose for this choosing Mount Ebal as the place for the altar and the writing. Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim were essentially a gateway into the land, and In the center, in the valley, is the place known as Shechem. And we talked about Shechem last week, as far as that's where Joseph's tomb was, and Jacob's well, and that's where Yeshua met with the Samaritan woman. Very, very important location, very central location. And Shechem literally it means between the shoulders, and that's because it sits in between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, between their shoulders. This was the place where Abram entered the land, and it was also where Jacob brought his family when he returned to it. It was like an immigration intake facility where new arrivals would come to the place of the covenant first. They would know the law of the land and figure out the difference between holy and profane, blessings and curses. And this was a place of remembrance. This is where the tribes separated and stood on one mountain and then in the other and proclaimed the blessings and the curses. And so what an incredible event that must have been. And I'm sure the strangers would be told the story of the ceremony that once took place there. Of course, all that history was the background surrounding the story of Yeshua and the Samaritan woman at the well we discussed last week. The stranger was expected to follow the rules of the land, the Torah, while visiting. Exodus 12:49 says, "One Torah shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you." And of course, that was when they hadn't even gotten to the land yet. And then in Numbers, Bamidbar, in the wilderness, says, "One Torah and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you." So whether they were in the land or going headed to the land, there's supposed to be one Torah. Well, these words were written on the stones. Those very commandments about one Torah, they were written on those stones as well. And it was the same Torah for everyone. And in case they didn't fully grasp it at Shechem, the rules were posted on every doorpost and gate throughout the land. The commandment of the mezuzah is as follows. It says, "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk in the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." The word doorpost is mezuzah in Hebrew, doorpost, singular. And that's why you often see mezuzot on the doorpost. That's the plural version. You see mezuzot on doorposts of those in Judaism. The problem is that they typically consist of a rolled up scroll in a tube, and the actual writing is hidden from view, so it completely misses the point. They treat the tube as a sort of talisman or charm that wards off evil instead of displaying the words that can actually be read. And I actually sell various options on the ShemaIsrael.net website that are visible and can be seen and read. And it's a start. Typically, it has the Shema on them or the 10 words. We have a variety of options there, but I'd actually like to see a design that it contains all the words. I think that would be pretty interesting. So I might be working on something like that. Well, here's the mezuzah command with an explanation of its purpose, its intended purpose in Deuteronomy. It says, "Therefore, you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, your nefesh, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers to give them, like the days of the heavens above the earth." So there's an express purpose for this command. It's not just about putting a tube on your doorpost so that you can check that box off your obedience list. The point is that you and your children see the words and remember them. You need to get them inside you and obey them, so that the blessings of the blessings of obedience are passed on to the next generation. They were for the benefit of all the people and visible for the stranger to see and learn as well. And when I was involved in evangelical Christianity, there was an enormous emphasis on witnessing. It would be could sometimes be daunting and unnatural as you try to force a conversation about Jesus into every situation. And that's really not witnessing, that's proselytizing. Our witness is when we live the commandments through our love of Yahweh, and our lives of obedience provide a witness to others who can read the instructions on our gates, and they walk by the way, and on our doorposts when they come to visit. Those words should explain why we are different. You don't have to hit people over the head with a Bible. You simply need to post the words for them to read and then live the words and speak the words. So the commandments were everywhere in the land for everyone to read, to hear, and to obey. And there are also memorial days found within those words. In fact, the first feast in the cycle of the appointed times carries a specific instruction to remember. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we are commanded to commemorate the day that the Israelites left Egypt. And it says, and Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand Yahweh brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. On this day you're going out in the month of the Abib. And it shall be when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to Yahweh. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what Yahweh did for me when I came from Egypt. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that Yahweh's Torah may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand Yahweh has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Well, like the mezuzah, this Memorial Day is a sign. It is something to be seen and heard as the words are spoken and passed on to the next generation. Now, there's something very special about this memorial that you only see if you read it in context. Remember that the Passover meal that preceded the Feast of Unleavened Bread was specifically instituted to protect the firstborn in the houses covered by the blood. The firstborn who were covered lived, and the firstborn who were not covered died. So there's an incredible focus on the firstborn already. Now consider the portion of scriptures preceding the commandment to remember. In Exodus 13:1 through 2, it says, then Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast. It is mine. Now consider the passage following the commandment to remember in Exodus 13, starting at 11. It says, it shall be when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to Yahweh all that open the womb, that is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males, shall be Yahweh's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, and if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So it shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall say to him, by strength of hand, Yahweh brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that Yahweh killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to Yahweh all males that open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand Yahweh brought us out of Egypt. So this remembrance is all focused on the firstborn, and we remember to confirm that the focus was on the firstborn when they left Egypt. And indeed, every birth of every firstborn was a remembrance as well. Well, why so much emphasis on the firstborn? Well, the firstborn of the family was a priest in the Melchizedek order. They were the ones who actually slaughtered the Passover lambs in Egypt. Remember how Abel presented the firstborn of his flocks? Yahweh respected Abel and his offering. And we read about that in Genesis 4:4. Abel was performing the service of Melchizedek. The firstborn of every house would be the mediator between Yahweh and his family. This points to the firstborn son of all creation. And we see this in the Hebrew text of Genesis 1:1, where the Aleph Tah is there, and it's confirmed by John 1, the Word, the Aleph Tah. Yeshua, as the firstborn of Yahweh, shed his blood on Passover as the Lamb of Elohim. Therefore, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we have the privilege of not only observing the Exodus from Egypt, but also, or not only remembering the Exodus from Egypt, but also remembering the fulfillment of the Passover lamb rehearsal by Yeshua. As we remember the past, it also helps us to look forward to the future as the promise of a greater Exodus. And that's one of the benefits of remembering. We remember that we need to continue in the way so that we may be part of the first fruits presented by the firstborn. Well, that leads to another important memorial day that happens once a week, the Shabbat. Here's the commandment spoken by Yahweh from the mountain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it set apart, Kodesh. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Shabbat of Yahweh, your Elohim. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. See the stranger there? It's one Torah. That's why the stranger is mentioned. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. Well, we're specifically told to remember this day. So every 7 days we should remember to set the day apart, and the fulfillment of remembering involves our actions, our resting. Our remembrance of the Shabbat is supposed to remind us of Creation Week. Many people do not understand what happened on day one. A close examination of the Hebrew text reveals that it was not a brand new creation of matter from nothing. The ingredients were already there when Yahweh began to fashion our world. The earth and the water were present in darkness when Yahweh began fashioning his creation, as a potter works with water and clay. It should remind us that we are a work in progress and that the Creator wants to continue to mold us into his likeness. And I thank Yahweh every day that he gives me more time to continue the process. Well, we must immerse in the living waters in order to stay moist and pliable so that the Master can continue to do this, to continue to form us. And when was the last time that you remembered creation on the Sabbath? Only if we actually rest are we properly remembering, and our resting is a sign to others that we are remembering. And of course, we're doing it because Yah himself rested on the seventh day after his creating. And of course, this is a good example of the difference between the Eastern and Western mindset. To a Westerner, the idea of remembering involves a thought, while remembering to a Hebrew means doing something, like resting on the Sabbath or like building an altar. Christians are taught to make a decision and believe in their heart, but they're often told that they don't have to follow the Torah as a demonstration or sign of their belief. They want to be saved, but on their own terms. We recently concluded Shavuot, and remember how at Mount Sinai the people rejected the voice of Yahweh? They weren't comfortable hearing the sound of the shofar. They wanted a mediator who wasn't so loud and intimidating. As a result, Moses went up the mountain to receive the instructions, but that wasn't good enough either. He took too long, and the people started getting restless. So they decided to declare a feast to Yahweh and worship a golden calf. They said they were doing it for Yahweh, but they were acting like a bunch of Egyptians. And this is exactly what Christians are doing when they celebrate Christmas and Easter. They aren't thinking or acting like Hebrews, they're acting like a bunch of Babylonians. Well, the problem is apparent. The people wanted a relationship on their own terms, but that is unacceptable in the eyes of Yahweh. Are you restless or uncomfortable with how things are going in your covenant journey? Have you gotten stuck on your way out of Babylon, or are you getting tired of waiting? Is living in a tent too difficult? Are you sick of camping? Are you remembering all the pleasures of Egypt? Would you rather go back to the known comforts of Babylon instead of facing the unknown challenges on the way to the promised land? Well, many of you have read my latest book titled Leaving Babylon, where I focus on the journey of Abram out of Babylon. And I like to point out that it was his father, Terah, who was first called to lead his family out of Babylon. Terah got as far as Haran and was about to cross over the Euphrates when he stopped short. I always wonder what happened. Did he talk to some locals and ask for directions? They would have likely responded, "You're going where? Don't you know there are giants across the river? They eat people, and they'll probably have you and your family for lunch." Well, did this give Terah pause? Did he stop to reassess and remember the safety and security of Babylon? He might have decided that the risks were too high, and he may have determined that Haran was as far as he was willing to go. The problem is that he was still in Babylon. The promises awaited in the promised land, the land of Canaan. That is the deal. We need to follow Yahweh if we want to dwell with him. And that's why Yeshua was constantly on the move and he told people, "Follow me." They had to get up and move. They had to exert themselves. Well, this world is being shaken and it's been very disorienting for some people who've had their world rocked. Many resort to the comfort and security of Babylon instead of trusting Yahweh to lead them out. They want to retreat to their recliner and their remote control and tune out. It's getting crazy out there after all. Well, the comfort zone is a dangerous place to be because it breeds apathy and complacency. I, for one, am extremely thankful for the experience of the last several years. It was a real wake-up call concerning the coordinated evil that rules the world, and it was a reminder that they want us all dead. It allowed me to explore my relationship with Yahweh in ways previously unimagined, and we all need to get out of our comfort zones if we truly want to follow Yahweh, if we want to leave Haran and cross over. Yahweh does not exist within a paradigm of a man-made religion or in a church building, and he doesn't fit well into the American dream either. So I encourage you to step out of the familiar and get ready to walk into the unknown, just like Abram. The enemy doesn't want you to cross over. He wants you to remain stuck in Haran, fearing what lies on the other side. Our tendency is to find a safe space, but Yahweh wants us to step out and learn how to trust him. And that's the lesson that Yahweh repeatedly showed the Israelites on their journey to the Promised Land. The weekly rehearsal of the Sabbath and all of the annual rehearsals are meant to teach us to remember, and that is what helps to build our faith. It will remind us that we serve an Elohim of miracles. When we remember and act accordingly, he will remember his covenant people. We read in Leviticus 26:40 through 45, "But if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their unfaithfulness, in which they were unfaithful to me, and that they also have walked contrary to me, and that I also have walked contrary to them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled, and they accept their guilt, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham. I will remember. I will remember the land. The land also shall be left empty by them, and will enjoy its Sabbaths while it lies desolate without them. They will accept their guilt because they despised my judgments and because their soul abhorred my statutes." Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor shall I abhor them, to utterly destroy them, and to break my covenant with them, for I am Yahweh their Elohim. But for their sake I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, in the sight of the nations, that I might be their Elohim. I am Yahweh. Well, notice the emphasis on remembering that traces back to Abraham. Sadly, Terah might have been in this lineage and in this very statement if he didn't stay in Babylon. Only when Abram crossed over and finally arrived in the covenant land did he begin erecting altars, and they were memorials testifying that Yahweh was faithful to his people and to his promises. Hebrews build memorials so that we can remember the goodness of Yahweh. Have you built any altars, or have you forgotten all the things Yahweh has done for you? In difficult times, it's important to remember not only the promises made, but also the promises fulfilled. So, as we spend this day resting and remembering, maybe take some time to remember all of the altars you have built on your journey out of Babylon. If you haven't built any, I encourage you to take a moment and remember and think about what altars you would build and where you would have built them. Altars are meant to last through time so that we can look upon them and remember them. They help us to stay focused on the covenant and not get distracted by this world. And that's also why we rehearse the appointed times. They're landmarks that we return to, they're waypoints on our journey. Well, you all are clearly aware of the fact that we are in the midst of the annual cycle of the appointed times if you've been reading these newsletters, and it's significant to note that the next appointed time is a day of remembrance. It's a memorial day. Yom Teruah, called the Day of Blasting, lands on day 1 of month 7. So you must know when a year begins, when a month begins, and when a day begins in order to observe this appointed time properly. You need to reckon all of the markers of time correctly, the two great lights provided through Genesis 1:14. Of course, Yeshua was born on Yom Teruah, and a great sign was provided in the skies when he was born. His birth was an incredible confirmation that the day begins after sunset because he was born at the beginning of Yom Teruah on September 11th, 3 BCE. And we know that because a great sign appeared in the sky over Jerusalem at that time. The sign is described in Revelation 12:1. It says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars." Well, it was after sunset when day 1 of month 7 began, and when the sign described in Revelation 12 was visible to those anticipating the appointed time. Shofars were blown throughout the land, announcing the birth of the king. It was right after sunset when the glow of the set sun could still be seen with the first crescent moon in the sky. This is the time often referred to as twilight, or between the evenings, and it's also when the Passover lambs were slaughtered at Passover. Well, it's amazing that the two great lights were a part of that sign and provided the markers for the specific appointed time. That sign alone should put to rest all those who insist upon promoting the notion that a day begins at sunrise. Of course, sunrise is the opposite of twilight. It is the dawning of the day when the sun shines light in the darkness. But remember that the first day of creation began in darkness, and then Yahweh spoke light into creation. The evening and the morning were the first day, Yom Echad. And Yom Echad can also mean a unified day, and it shows how a full day consisting of the dark portion and the light portion is stitched together into a complete cycle. This is very Hebrew, and I actually did a teaching on it on YouTube, Understanding Hebrew Day. And, a good example is Yisrael. Okay, the Kol Yisrael, all Yisrael, are all 12 tribes, right? But you also have the 10 northern tribes called the House of Yisrael, and then you have the southern tribes, House of Yehuda. So just like you have a day, has a day portion and a night portion, well, so does Yisrael. Yisrael has the house of Yisrael and the house of Judah. So that's a good example of why the day is not just the light, but it's all of the both portions stitched together. Well, the problem is that many people try to apply their Western thinking to an Eastern text, and that's primarily why people searching for their Hebrew roots are spreading so much confusion. If we remember creation when we remember the Sabbath each week, these issues become clear. We begin Shabbat in darkness, just as creation began in darkness. Evening occurs after sunset. It marks the beginning of the day when we can see the light of the moon, which marks the passage of days. It all makes perfect sense, and when you actually operate under the calendar, you can see this. When you're looking for the new moon after sunset and you sight it, you know at that moment that it's day one. You don't have to wait another day or some nondescript time, uh, to make that determination. It's perfectly timed. One day ends, you look up, you see the new moon. Another day is beginning, and so is another month. So you know the month when the month begins right on the first day. Well, sadly, there are those who confuse the sheep because they're trying to understand Hebrew roots with Western minds. Now, here's the command concerning Yom Teruah. It says, and Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial, a zikron. Proclaim with blast of trumpets, and that would be shofars, a holy convocation, a mikra kadosh, kadosh mikra. You shall not do any ordinary work, and you shall present the food offering to Yahweh. Well, the Hebrew word zikron means a memorial, a remembrance, or a record. So Yom Teruah is the real memorial day, if you follow Yahweh. Amazingly, when I wrote this, we were exactly in the middle of the week of 7 months. We know that the appointed times occur between month 1 and month 7 of the year. And there are actually 3.5 months until Yom Teruah, and we're literally in the midst of the week. If you're in America, I encourage you to look forward to Yom Teruah when we have the privilege and honor of remembering the birth of Yeshua along with his teachings, his renewal of the covenant, his death, resurrection, and the sending of the Spirit. So may that be your true Memorial Day. But we don't simply memorialize his death. The focus is on his birth and his life. Indeed, it is his birthday on Yom Teruah. And I find it interesting that Yahuwah built a birthday celebration into the appointed times. And I know that some people like to point out that birthday celebrations have pagan origins, but the simple fact is that mankind has always kept track of people's ages, and that's why genealogies are so important and helpful in reckoning biblical time. So obviously, we've been keeping track of people's births and years and ages since creation. Well, when we remember the Messiah on Yahweh's Memorial Day, we also recall the promises of the good things to come. As a result, only the followers of Yeshua can truly celebrate the fullness of this incredible appointed time. Specifically, those followers of Yeshua who use the two great lights and reckon time properly. As we pass through Shavuot, I encourage people to keep counting because this is no time to be complacent. Continuing to count helps keep us focused on the lessons that Israel was supposed to learn on the way to the Promised Land. If we continue to track the children of Israel on their journey out of Egypt to the Promised Land, we know that Moses went up the mountain on Shavuot to receive further instructions. While Moses was gone, the children of Israel were not without instructions. Yahweh had just spoken the 10 words, often called the 10 Commandments. How could they forget those words? They should have been resonating in their brains and rattling their bones. In addition, water was still flowing from the rock, and manna was appearing 6 days a week. They had all been circumcised in Egypt, so that sign was a constant reminder of the covenant. They bore the sign of the covenant that traced back to their father Abraham. They knew their origins, and they likely knew the oral traditions and the Torah instructions as well. After all, Abraham knew the Torah. He obeyed it, and he surely taught it to his household. All who dwelled with him were circumcised. Remember what was spoken of concerning Abraham. It says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my Torah. So the fact that Moses was absent does not mean that the Israelites did not know how to live. They had reminders everywhere. And the same holds true with us. Yeshua ascended nearly 2,000 years ago, and we anxiously await his return. Nevertheless, he taught us how to live. He showed us through the example of his life. He even distilled the Ten Commandments into two great commands. In Matthew 22, we read, Yeshua said to him, you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands hang all the Torah and the prophets. We also have reminders everywhere, and we have the Spirit to help us remember. So as you rest on Shabbat and look to the two great lights to help you count your days to Memorial Day, the upcoming Yom Teruah, let us remember the two great commandments as we await his return. Remember to build altars for Yahweh so that you don't end up building a golden calf. My name is Todd Bennett from Shema Israel. Barakot and Shalom.